morning, class. Professor Bankert here. We're going to be talking about constitution view. This is sort of a response to your first reflections regarding the constitution view. I have a few comments. I want to help provide some clarity and maybe give a few examples. Some of you, this is review, you feel like you get it. Stick with me. Hopefully, I think I'm going to say some things that will hopefully make you think a little bit and maybe add some clarity. Other things might just be simply review. But don't shut this off just yet. Again, I think that it'll help perpetuate the dialogue. First thing I want to talk a little bit about is mystery. This is something that will come up in theology classes, especially a class like this, which is philosophy, but we're raising metaphysical issues with regard to human beings, the soul and afterlife, the incarnation. Certainly, mystery is a part of the Christian faith. And I'm someone who's not opposed to mystery. I'm a proponent of it. So I get the sense some students think that philosophers are trying to answer every one of these questions, and they can't be answered. They're too big. There's too much mystery. I think Corcoran tells you, right, there are elements of mystery involved. With that said, even for really complicated issues, like what it means to be human, what's the essence of human nature, there are better responses than others. There are some really good responses, some really bad responses. We might have a series of good responses. But that helps us get closer to the truth, right? And then we say, well, we can't know the ultimate truth in this area because there is an element of mystery, but at least we feel like we're getting closer rather than further away. So mystery plays a big element, but I'll say it differently. Mystery is important. However, if we simply left all theological questions to mystery, right? Well, we don't know. God is transcendent. God is bigger than my brain, my little tiny brain can possibly understand or fathom, and we say mystery, then you essentially allow people to believe whatever they want. I can believe whatever I want because it's all just mystery, right? There's no good or bad arguments. There's no evidence telling me that I should go in one direction rather than another. No arguments or ideas that can help. So I'll just believe this because it's all mystery. But the moment you say, no, you shouldn't believe that, you're in error, you're going in the wrong direction, then you have to give reasons why that person's going in the wrong direction. You have to say, this is why you're wrong, and you should not believe what you believe there and just appeal to mystery, but in fact, you should come this way. And those arguments are going to have reasons involved. There's going to be evidence involved. Something that says, given the marketplace of ideas and worldviews, some are better than others. Some are more supported than others, right? So we can't simply appeal to mystery. So philosophers and theologians, I would argue, try very hard to say, yes, God, in God's ultimate nature, will be somewhat mysterious. No doubt about it. We'll never be able to box God and define God. God will always be more than we can comprehend. Human nature, we might never solve this problem fully. There will always be an element of human nature. But we should wake up every day and strive to know more of God. Strive to know more about God. Wake up every day and strive to know more about what it means to be human. And to do that means we take our ideas and we lay them on the table. We take our arguments, we lay them on the table, and we say, do these stand up to critical scrutiny? Can we weed out some of these ideas as being bad, blatantly sort of false, contradictory against the evidence we have right now? And some of them may be stronger. And maybe we don't have one right answer, but a set that, again, are stronger than maybe some others. And that's what philosophy is trying to do. And I think as we pursue good ideas, good elements of reason and logic, humility and open dialogue and discourse, the more we do that, I think the closer we get to the truth. We might not get there in full. I don't think we will. But we'll get closer. Whereas if we just say it's all mystery, there's no striving then. We don't strive for this knowledge or this truth. We simply say, well, I'll never know, so we'll just believe whatever we want. So I think we have to find a middle ground here where mystery plays a vital role in our faith, and we work and put in the diligence to really pursue good ideas and reject bad ideas, those that can be supported versus those that can't. And philosophy, we've been dealing with this, right? Trying to give criteria, good arguments versus fallacies, working on trying to sort of move us towards the truth. So I wanted to at least talk a little bit about mystery there. Well, let's get into some of the content. Some of you seem to just nail the Constitution view. You understood it. You could give examples. You could explain it in your own words. Great. Some of you, not so much. And so I want to give just a quick overview. So I'm going to use the term I initially, right? So I'm going to be here. I am constituted by my biological body. Joe Bankard is constituted by this thing in front of you, right? My hands, my feet, my legs, my torso, my eyes, my hair, my body. But I, Joe Bankard, am not identical to my biological body, right? So I can't exist without my body. I'm constituted by it. It's what allows me to exist. But I am also something more than my body, something other than my body in certain ways. Now, to be an I, in the sense I used above, is to be a human person. And so Corcoran uses the term personhood, what it means to be a human person. But sometimes that can get confusing, so I try to use the term I, Joe Bankard, am a human person, right? But the I, whatever that is constituted by my body, but not identical to my body. And I say, that is, a human person, like me, like you, is dependent upon their physical body for existence. I can't exist without my body. The body is a necessary condition for being a human person. You cannot be a human person without a body, right? Necessary. But a person cannot be reduced to their body. Bodies are not sufficient for personhood. Bodies are necessary. You have to have one, right, in order to be a person. But it's not sufficient because you need more than just a body to be a human person, right? Necessary and sufficient are important in philosophical discourse. Anytime you're trying to define something, you're trying to identify necessary and sufficient conditions. I can give an easy example. If I say Jake is a bachelor, if you know that Jake is single, being single is a necessary condition for being a bachelor. But being single is not sufficient for bachelorhood. We also need to know that Jake is a man, right? So being a man is necessary for being a bachelor, but it's not sufficient, because if you're a married man, you're not a bachelor. So being a man is necessary, not sufficient for bachelorhood. Being single is necessary for being a bachelor, but it's not sufficient, because if you're a single female, you're not a bachelor. If you take those two conditions together, I'm single and a male, or Jake is single and a male, now that is both necessary and sufficient for him being a bachelor. So anytime you're trying to define what it means to be a bachelor, you're going to talk about necessary and sufficient conditions. What does it mean to be a person? You're going to be talking about necessary and sufficient conditions. How do we get there? The body is a necessary condition for being a person, but it's not sufficient. There's other stuff that goes into being a person, right? So, what does it mean to be a human person, very specifically? What does it mean to be a human person? And this is important. This cannot be lost on you. Corcoran is trying to say your body is a necessary component of what it means to be a person, but not sufficient. Being a person requires something extra, and that is why he tries to tell you what it means to be a person. He's going to show you that it's more than being a body. In some sense, the purpose is to say, I'm not a materialist. I'm not an animalist. I believe that the body is necessary, but unlike those other two, I don't think the body is sufficient for being a human person. So, what does it mean to be a human person? Number one, you must have a body. Necessary condition, but not sufficient. Two, a human person must have intentional states. I must, be able to believe certain things, desire certain things, intend certain things, will certain things. I get hungry, and so I go to the refrigerator to get something to eat. That's an intentional state, right? It requires some level of consciousness that I can direct my thoughts and my behavior. Again, intentional states. These are necessary, but not sufficient for being a human person. because he says dogs, chimpanzees, these things also have intentional states. My dog believes certain things, like my food is over there, my bed is over there. When someone walks by, they pose a threat, so I'll bark. They have a certain level of consciousness and certain level of intentional states, but they're not a human person, so dogs have a body, dogs have intentional states, both necessary for being a human, but clearly not sufficient, because dogs are not human persons. The third element is that you have to have a first-person perspective. And what this means is that I lay in bed and I think about the fact that I'm thinking. I can imagine myself and how I'll feel at my son's graduation. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm conscious, morally responsible, and whatnot. I have a particular way of interpreting, seeing, and evaluating my world that no one else has but me. And so, put these three things together. Having a body is necessary but not sufficient. Plants have bodies, animals have bodies, dogs have bodies. Intentional states, that's also necessary but not sufficient. Dogs have both bodies and intentional states, not enough. But if you have a body, intentional states, and a first-person perspective, now you put all three of those together and you've got a set of criteria that's both necessary and sufficient for being a human person. You are now a full human person, an I, right? You have a sense of human identity. Any one of these things missing, you're not a human person. You're something else, or you don't have a body and you don't exist, right? At least not as a human. And so you need all three of these. And then he sort of gives the argument as to why I'm constituted by my body but not identical to my body. This is really, right, the core. Premise one, a human person must have a body. Necessary. A human person must have intentional states and a first-person perspective. Right? My body can and does exist without intentional states or a first-person perspective. When I am an infant, I have a human body, but I do not have intentional states and I do not have a first-person perspective. When I'm in the womb, same thing. People can have brain damage, go into comas, get onset dementia, mental illness. All kinds of things can happen where you lose your first-person perspective, you lose your intentional states, but your body still exists. And all of us will die at some point. When we die, our bodies will still be there, but we will have no intentional states and no first-person perspective. So the human body that constitutes me right now is not identical to me because my body can clearly exist without those conditions necessary for what it means to be a person. Intentional states and a first-person perspective. So I may need my body may be a necessary condition for my existence, but it's not identical to who I am, who Joe Bankert is. There's something more here, something other, right? Vital. So important that you understand this argument because he's trying to say, I'm not a dualist because I think you need your body for your identity, not just your soul, but I'm not a materialist because I don't think who I am can be reduced to my body, right? Something that was brought up by several of you was that, well, this is a really generic version of what it means to be a person. Isn't he missing a bunch of things about what it means to be human? Yes. You have to understand, Corcoran's purpose here is just to give you the bare minimum. What's the bare minimum that something needs to have in order to be a human person? So he's not going to talk about relationships, beauty, creativity, all the things that comes with humanity, at least most of us. He's trying to just get the bare limit of necessary and sufficient conditions for what it means to be human. Now, you might say, well, that's not enough. There need to be more conditions other than having a human biology, intentional states, and a first-person perspective. Great. What is Corcoran missing? What else is a necessary condition for being a human? Or maybe you think he's got too many. We can eliminate some of those and still say that the person is human, right? Well, which ones can we eliminate? The animalist is going to say, all we need is a body. We don't need the other stuff for personhood, right? But Corcoran's going to say, no, that you're limited. The dualist is going to say, we don't even need a body. We just need our soul. That's what it means to be person. So he's giving you a particular argument that you may agree with, but you may disagree with. The question is, how do you go about attacking him? Has he left something out that's necessary for being a human person? Has he created 3 conditions or criteria and you think we only need 1 or 2? So that might be a way of disagreeing, but his purpose is just to give you sort of the bare bones of what it means to be a human person. All right. Is the CV view dualistic? Some can see this dualistically, right? Well, if I'm constituted by my body, but I'm not identical to my body, then you must have a dualism, something other than my body. No, Corcoran is not a dualist, and here's why. Corcoran does not advocate for a non-physical soul. He does not advocate for a non-physical reality or substance of any kind when it comes to the human person, right? We are purely physical beings. Humans are purely physical, which makes them a monist. One kind of substance makes up the human person, and it's physical substance. A dualist means you have to have more than one substance. You've got to have something non-physical connecting here. He does not believe that that is the case. We are wholly physical. So he's not a dualist in that sense. One type of substance makes up what it means to be human. But in the same vein, CV view is not materialistic either. We've been talking about that. The materialist or the animalist wants to say, I'm nothing more than my body. I can be reduced to, my mental activity can be reduced to my brain activity. Corcoran says no. I'm constituted by it, cannot be reduced to it. It's a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition for personhood. Something more is going on. My own consciousness, my intentional states, my first-person perspective, which is unique to me, cannot simply be reduced to my body, which clearly can exist without my intentional states or my first-person perspective or my consciousness. So they don't have the same properties. They can't be identical. So we've got something else going on. It's actually more closely related, I would argue, to maybe emergent dualism in a way, whereas the physical develops and combines in certain complex ways, consciousness emerges out of the physical matter. My first-person perspective emerges out of my brain and my physical body, which it's dependent upon. I'm not going to have consciousness or a first-person perspective without my body. The difference is, at no point is there a dualism in the sense of a non-physical substance that emerges, right? Well, now let's talk about the incarnation and Imago Dei a little bit. The purpose for him when he's talking about incarnation and Imago Dei, he gives very short. It's like 1 page for each. He in no way gives an adequate account of the incarnation or the Imago Dei. He's not trying to. I mean, these would take 30 pages each to give a full and adequate account. He's just trying to accomplish a very specific goal in my mind, and this is what it is. He thinks that his audience will be Christians, and he thinks many of the people that are Christians will be dualists. And these dualists are going to look at him and say, well, if you're not a dualist, you can't be a Christian, because you have to deny the incarnation, and you've got to deny the Imago Dei, and a bunch of other things, life after death. And so you have to be a dualist in order to be a Christian. And I think what Corcoran's trying to do here with the incarnation and the Imago Dei is say, no, my constitution view is compatible with these core doctrines. It's compatible with life after death because there's going to be a bodily resurrection. It's compatible with the incarnation. In fact, it's maybe better than substance dualism. It's compatible with being created in the image of God, and here's why. So he's giving you very short, insufficient views of these doctrines, these theological concepts, because his primary goal is just to show you that his constitution view is compatible with Christian orthodoxy. Therefore, you can be a Christian philosopher and accept the constitution view. That's sort of his goal. So with the incarnation, he says, look, constitution view is better than substance dualism because, for me, humans are purely physical, bodily, right? Jesus then has a human nature. He is physical, has a brain and a body that is unique to him, a first-person perspective and intentional states that are unique to him. But he also has this divine nature, which is non-physical, because for Corcoran, the triune God is non-physical. God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, in their natures do not inhabit a physical body. So you've got the divine nature, which is non-physical, coming down and connecting to the physical body. These represent the 2 natures of Jesus. He says, but this gets really muddy if we have substance dualism, because now the human person has a soul, a non-physical eternal element, and a body. And then we've got this third thing, the divine nature, coming and connecting. So now you've got a three-part person rather than a two-part person, which seems to create problems. Is it Jesus' divine nature that ascends to heaven? Or is it the human soul and that element that ascends to heaven? How do we work that out? And he says the Constitution view has a neater, cleaner solution. And that, in his mind, makes for a strong philosophical argument. With regards to the Imago Dei, very interesting. Many people believe humans are created in the image of God because we have this non-physical soul that is eternal, that's a part of God in us, and that will return to God in death or to hell. But we're created in the image of God because in our essence, in our very nature, we have this non-physical element, right here, this dualism. But Corcoran says, well, no, maybe we're created in the image of God through action. We image God when we model God's love to the world, to each other, to creation. We image God, and I would argue, Corcoran could have taken this further, the fact that human beings are free, we have free will, this is part of what it means to be created in the image of God. Human beings are rational. I think God is somewhat rational, created in the image of God. Human beings are creative. God is by nature creative, image of God. Humans are by nature relational. God in his triune nature is relational. So you could list a ton of these things. None of them require dualism. They would all be compatible with the Constitution view. If being created in the image of God means things like my free will, my rationality, my creativity, my relationality, my ability to love and be moral the way God is moral, care for creation. So he's sort of switching it from image of God by nature or essence to image of God by action and through capacity. So very interesting. Again, lots of things to agree or disagree with. I think there are issues with Corcoran, and I think some of you have brought up those issues in your post. You're asking good questions and whatnot, so that's good. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys online.